Welcome to Know Better to Do Money Better, the podcast that's here to help you avoid stressing about money and make smarter money choices. This show is a production of the Financial Empowerment Conference series, and in each episode, we break down the habits, strategies, and mindsets that make managing money understandable, doable, and actually fun. Because let's be honest, you work hard for your money. It's time your money started working hard for you. From practical budgeting tips and real-life success stories to straight talk about mindset and wealth building, this is your space to learn how you can do better with your money, one episode at a time. Because when you know better, you do better.
Hello there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Know Better to Do Money Better, podcast of the Financial Empowerment Conference series. In this episode, we're going to discuss a lot of things, but among them, what is a major financial risk that people may not be adequately prepared for right now. So we'll dig into that and much more on this episode of Know Better to Do Money Better. I am one of your hosts tonight, Kevin Turner, along with Bobby Van Buren. We are both co-chairs of the Financial Empowerment Conference Series, and we have joining us tonight as a host, a special guest, a longtime member of Turner Chapel, and also a former member of the church that our featured guest pastored for some time, Miss Liddy Brown, who is one of the founders of Speed Pro Imaging, a graphics production company in Marietta, Georgia. So let me just quickly introduce our featured guest for the night. His name is Dr. DeForest B. Soaries. He is a retired pastor who has also been a voice in the financial space for many decades. And he really gained national attention when his church was featured in CNN's Black in America documentary called Almighty Debt. He is the founder of the D-Free movement, which I'm sure we'll cover quite a bit tonight as we go along. He's going to be the keynote speaker at our upcoming Financial Empowerment Conference on March 14th, as well as serving as our guest preacher on Church Anniversary Sunday on March 15th. So, Dr. Soaries, welcome to the show.
Thanks for what you do. Thanks for your leadership. And thanks for reconnecting me to one of my former members, one of my good members. You know, not every member is a good member. But I almost cried real tears when Liddy Brown left New Jersey. But
Yeah, she
thank
is a treasure.
Oh, she's a strategic weapon in the kingdom of God. Believe me.
Indeed, indeed. Well, since she is one of your former members, we wanted to have her on to kind of make sure everything was comfortable for you and kind of help us with posing some of the questions that we have for tonight. And so I'm going to let her kind of kick things off with whatever questions are on her mind to start.
All right. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Bobby and Pastor Soaries. You know, you're still one of my favorites for sure. And I'm sure the church has moved on, but I'm sure they are missing you as pastor for sure. I want to just say thank you for letting me participate in this event and being a part of everything we do. And so I've got the kickoff question. I guess they gave me a softball question to ask. Um, you've been a pioneer in personal finance, especially from a faith-based perspective. What would you say drove you to have this focus? Even as our pastor, you were still doing a lot of this, starting off with the emphasis on being debt-free, and then now moving to more of a financial self-sufficiency. So what got you going this way?
Well, thanks for the question. Again, thanks for having me tonight. This is an important week for me. As you know, Liddy, I started out working for Jesse Jackson when I was 23 years old, and we lost Reverend Jackson this week. And that's really the answer to the question. After Martin Luther King died in 1968, and I went to college in 1969, I was curious to know what the civil rights movement was going to become. I was looking for new leadership. I was wondering where I fit into a national movement since I'd been an activist as a teenager. And I came to the conclusion by 1973 that the answer to all of my questions of connecting faith to social justice, the question of new young leadership, and the question of activist focus was Jesse Jackson. And so I kind of weaseled my way into his life. and and at 23, he hired me to organize chapters for his new organization, Operation Push. And 1 year later, he made me the national director of Push. And so I worked with him every day. The reason he's the answer to the question was because Jesse Jackson's message in 1971, when he founded Operation Push, was that the civil rights movement was over, and it was over because it won. We won the right to vote. We won public accommodations access. We won the Voting Rights Act in 1968. But we still needed an economic movement. We needed a movement for entrepreneurship, for home ownership, to develop the wealth corollary to the social justice and political agenda. So I was attracted to that message in 1973. And therefore, all of the work I do today that we have branded D Free is an extension of my youthful passion for economic progress, economic empowerment, and economic justice.
Wow, that's awesome. And actually, I was going to mention him in my next question, so I'm glad you went that direction. I was in high school when we started to really hear about Reverend Jesse Jackson, and by the time I got to college, it was full on and involved with his entire movement. I still say keep hope alive every day. So, uh, can you talk about being on the front lines during the civil rights movement? Uh, how has that shaped you to what you bring to this mission under financial empowerment? What did you see?
Well, again, I was a teenager in the '60s, but because of my work with Reverend Jackson, I had an opportunity to work hand in hand with the people who had worked in the civil rights movement. So I didn't need to rely simply on like a TV series like Eyes on the Prize or just books written by people like Taylor Branch. I was able to talk to Andrew Young, to talk to Coretta King, to understand Fred Shuttlesworth, to meet with and form a friendship with Otis Moss Jr. And what I learned, essentially, I learned three things. One, I learned how to organize our community. The civil rights movement was really a work of art as it related to organizing our people. One of the themes that came out of the '60s was that we should have unity without uniformity. In other words, we did not strive to everybody dress the same way or speak the same way or have the same religious and philosophical background. We focused on organizing around common themes and common goals and common objectives. When I translate that to today, my work is really, in addition to having curriculum and books, is really inviting our community to organize around things that pertain to all of us. You see, in the 1950s and 60s, all of us were exposed to the barriers caused by discrimination. And so discrimination, racism, Jim Crow, it affected Black people somewhat equally. Today, all of us are impacted by high interest rates, by debt to income ratios being disproportionately impacting our lives, by low savings rates, by predatory lending, by redlining. And so the economics of today are really the stepchildren, the grandchildren, the descendants of the Jim Crow barriers of yesterday. So organizing our people around the economic common denominators comes straight from the organizational successes of the civil rights days. Second is how to mobilize our people and get our people to move from one place to the next. And when we come to Turner next month, we'll be talking about how to get started. The financial challenges now are so complicated, and the marketing messages and the manipulation is so pervasive that it's hard for people to know, where do I start? And we get questions all the time. Should I invest in the stock market? Should I pay off my debt? Should I try to save? And then as Christians, can I should I tithe? Can I tithe? Should I start at 3%? So you have all of these questions. So
Mhm.
mobilizing our people, starting with getting from the level that we're on to the level that we can achieve. And then not only organizing and mobilizing, but actually achieving some tangible goals. It's not as hard as it seems, but it's different than it was. And so I've taken the science and the art, the spirit and the substance from the civil rights experiences and backgrounds that I've had to translate that into what we call the D free financial freedom movement.
I think that's awesome. Awesome. Because even as pastor, you were already pushing that message about freedom. And for me, tithing is a big part of what I do, but it's tied to how do you manage your money? Because
Right,
that doesn't do anything if you don't understand where the rest of the money is going.
right.
I
Now
think
y'all see why I was so sad when she left New Jersey. She took
they
those ties with her.
they do travel. Um, but since retiring from your pastoral ministry, you really have just kind of gone to another extension of that. I don't really consider you actually retired. Uh, but what would you say the common theme of all the things that you're doing, and how does that fit into where you were when you first started, with Reverend Jackson, to all the way to where you are now,
Yeah.
new
Well,
life?
the common theme is to try to live a Christ-like life,
Mhm.
and not the Christ of politics, not the Christ of race, not the Christ of power, but the Christ of Luke chapter 4, where Jesus quoted Isaiah and said, "The Spirit of the Lord anointed him to preach good news to the poor and set captives free." So for me to be Christ-like is to be someone who does work that brings hope and help to those who are struggling, those who are marginal, those who are what we call in the financial world financially fragile. Middle income people who are still living paycheck to paycheck and don't have $400 for an emergency. And so not just in word but in deed. That's in a word what I do. So it's being a servant. It's being a servant who reflects the love, the compassion, and the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's awesome. Bobby, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, yeah, I think I have a slight delay in mine, so he might have a slight delay in my question. But Dr. Soares, it is fantastic to see you again. The last time you were here, Kevin and I were the hosts back then, and it's a pleasure to talk to you and see you're still thriving. Um, your guidance applies to all types of people. The AME Church was founded on the intent to empower African American people of African descent, and clearly, our community has its challenges, just like any community of color. So, how do you describe the state of personal finances? You talked about places where to start, how people are, what they're asking, where do they begin? But, our challenges seem to be a little bit different in the community. So, how would you describe the state of personal finances within the communities of color?
Well, again, I think the term financially fragile is probably the most inclusive term. And here's why I say that. We often talk about people in terms of their income, low income, middle income, upper income. But almost half of the people in this country, black and white, who earn $100,000 a year or more are living paycheck to paycheck. And if you are living paycheck to paycheck and closing the gaps with high interest credit cards, you are financially fragile. And when we talk about wealth, therefore, we then put more emphasis on not income, but assets. And if we only focus on income and don't focus on assets, we can be as it were cash rich and asset poor. So the state of Black America is such that there's a very small percentage of us that can claim to be wealthy, very small percentage. And the rest of us are either financially fragile or just straight up poor. And what I think we have to do, therefore, is help our community understand definitions. There is a difference between making a lot of money, having high income, and having high net worth.
Yeah.
Net worth is your assets minus your liabilities, which is why, as Liddy said, we started focusing on debt because if you have high income and high debt, you could end up with a zero net worth. There's an organization, forget the name of it, Prosperity Now. And they've done the research and they've looked at the financial trajectory. And their estimate is if there's no major intervention in Black America, by the year 2053, the median net worth in Black America will be zero. So you add up all the assets of rich black people and all the liabilities of poor black people. And as a community, our net worth, not our incomes, but our net worth is zero. So we talk a lot about the $1.7 trillion that black people spend, but we don't talk enough about how much of that $1.7 trillion translates into assets that can create generational wealth.
And especially coming back to our community, how much of that percentage comes back to us. But I'm going to pivot my second question because uh, in this world of social media, it everybody can look one way and the reality is just what you're talking about, right? How much they have and what the real assets are. And so on you can look like anybody on social media and you can look like you're successful or rich, but the reality is just the opposite. So do you see any signs that we're moving or going in a better direction?
I see plenty of signs. I think today the crisis that many of us face in terms of opposition, the the explicit dismantling of DEI, the undoing of the um, I almost said Section 8 of the 8A program. I think government policies are stripping us back down to where we were um, decades ago. And I think it's forcing us to look at new strategies. It's forcing us to understand who will and will not be available as resources for us. I think to the extent that we were looking to government for a lot of benefits, at least for the next few years, we can't expect those benefits to happen. And so we are putting more emphasis now on entrepreneurship. The organizations I work with, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority, National Baptist Convention, there's a tremendous growth in focus on entrepreneurship, not just starting a business, but buying a business. There are a lot of baby boomers who are aging out of the business they own. Their children don't want the business. They're too old to keep the business. And so we're talking in D3. And in my new book, I talk about this, the idea that it might be more reasonable to buy an existing business than to start a brand new business, especially when you have these populations of people who are transitioning out of ownership into retirement. So I think these conversations are proliferating. My phone jumps off the hook. I don't have any marketing campaign. I don't spend any money on advertising, but people are asking for our books. We're launching D3 at a church in Mississippi that has 17,000 members. We just launched we're relaunching in Virginia at Alfred Street Baptist Church. The Church of God in Christ has invited us in to train their pastors in financial stewardship, financial leadership. And so I think for better or for worse, today's environment lends itself to the kind of opportunity that we had over 100 years ago. When Reconstruction ended and it was clear that we were not getting our 40 acres and a mule, we put our emphasis on our families, our finances, and our faith and education. And I
Yeah.
think there's a renewed interest in HBCUs. There's a renewed interest in the black church. I
Mhm.
know the black church takes a lot of hits, and some of the big name mega churches are always embroiled in some kind of controversy. But when you look past the celebrity preachers and the so-called mega churches, there are people who are returning to their spiritual and ethnic roots, the AME Church, the Baptist Church, Church of God in Christ, and the like.
Well, Kevin, Liddy, and I are all small business owners, so I can tell you that they
We
have to
are.
get their financial strategy in place on the personal side before they go open that business because it's not gonna change. It's not gonna get any better until they have to have a plan.
We say that all the time. You gotta make sure your taxes are straight. You gotta make sure that your debt to income ratio is straight. You gotta be bankable, and those people that promote entrepreneurship among our people and try to skip over the personal financial responsibility are really leading them down a path to destruction. I see these ads all the time on social media. Just start an LLC and the bank will lend you
Yes,
$50,000, even if you have bad credit. And they're lying to these people.
yes,
Yes.
they are.
They're lying. These are just straight up lies. And that's why I love what you're doing at Turner. You've done it before, and you've gone even deeper now to ensure that at the very least, Turner members know the truth the truth about God, the truth about life, and the truth about finance.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like Bobby said, we were just so thrilled that you agreed to come back again after being with us in 2014, I believe it was. You did just an awesome video talking about the experience you had with us, and we really appreciated that. And
Great.
of course, you're going to be speaking in two different forums to us in March, so we're very much looking forward to that. But with this upcoming conference, our theme is eliminate to accumulate to activate. And that's part of why we felt like you would be a great person to speak to that message. So without giving away what you're going to talk about, I'm sure you probably already made some notes. Can you just give us a little taste of kind of what you're going to cover so that people who might be considering attending will understand what they're going to get by coming out?
Sure. Before we think about big goals and buying companies and making a lot of money in cryptocurrency. Um, this whole idea of eliminate to accumulate is so core to my message, my writing, my teaching, and my experience. Just this week, and I've been doing this now every day for 21 years. Just this week, I discovered something on Google that I didn't know existed, and in on my phone because I lost one of my phones. So I was trying to find it on my other phone, and I bumped into this Google subscriptions list. I didn't know it was on the phone, so I clicked the Google subscriptions and discovered I was paying for subscriptions to things I did not even know. In some instances, I wanted to test something, and you put in your credit card, and they say
Yep.
a 7-day free trial, and you forget all about the free trial. And before you know it, it's chipping away every
Yep.
month. So I went, this is this week in my own life. I went down the list and I unsubscribed from about 13 different things and saved $60 a month, which is $720 a year. Now, I've been teaching and preaching finance for 21 years straight. And it didn't occur to me that I was allowing my money to go someplace I didn't even know and didn't use it. So now that's $60. That $60 can go to donations. That $60 I can put in savings. That $60 I can use to just help somebody who's broke. That $60 I can put away for emergencies. That's real money. $60 is real money. And so when we talk about elimination, that's where we start. I was at a church 2 weeks ago, actually online, and the coordinator of their event, just like you're coordinating your event, he just confessed in the meeting. He said, I drink 2 cups of Starbucks a day, every day, not one, two. And if you do the math, two times five is 10, and
Yep.
if each cup costs at least $5, that's $50. That's $2,500 a year
Right.
on coffee that doesn't even taste good. So that's where we have to start. If we don't start there, if we start with, oh, I need a raise on my job. Listen, in my book, I give some suggestions to people on how to get a raise on your job. There's a way to do it, and we coach people in that. But don't get a raise on your job if you're not tracking the spending that you're doing right now and separating. And this I will talk about because I can't avoid talking about it. Separating your needs from your wants. Christians get on my nerves sometimes. Christians will quote the Bible and not live by the Bible. The Bible says that God will supply all of our needs according to God's riches and glory. That's in the Bible, right? But if we've never separated our wants from our needs, then we won't even know when God provides our needs because we'll be praying for what we want. God would have provided our needs, and we'll be mad at God thinking God didn't give us what we need. It's a theological problem, and it's not sexy, it's not cute, it's not newsworthy per se, but I promise you, it's life changing. Because I've been doing this so long, there are people that Liddy knows were members of First Baptist, and she was there, who are now retiring. And they send me email and text messages and social media messages all the time saying, I'm able to retire because I started living the lifestyle you were teaching us at First Baptist. So I'm excited. I'm excited because in addition to all of this information, I believe it can only happen correctly in church, and not because there's magic in the church, but the doctrine of the church. We believe that our minds are the most powerful computers we have. We believe in physical fitness, but the core of the church is our spirituality. And the fear that holds us back sometimes, that's a spiritual problem.
Yeah.
Greed is a spiritual problem, right? A lack of discipline. Paul said that the Holy Spirit has fruit, and among the fruit is self-control and discipline and patience. So if I can't wait until I can afford to buy a flat screen TV, that's not a financial problem, that's a spiritual problem.
Mm.
So then I'll pay Citibank 22 cents on the dollar for the right to buy a
Mhm.
$2,000 TV only because I didn't have the patience. Patience is a
Mhm.
spiritual problem, and that's why the church is so critical. We have to align our financial goals with our spiritual goals.
Very
Great
true.
point.
And I
Yeah.
like you pointing out about the subscription. I might have to talk to you offline about this Google subscription thing because I might need to do some checking myself.
Check it
Me
out.
too.
Check
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
out.
But it goes back to something we talked about in our first episode that we recorded, which is no matter where you are in your walk, you need to be teachable. There's always more that you can learn. So you've been doing this for decades upon decades, and you're still open to learning new things and
I'm
incorporating them. And that's kind of
absolutely.
the whole point of what we're trying to do is not just, like you say, put the information out there, but help people to implement it.
Yeah, and we learn from each other. We have an online community now. We didn't have it when I first met you. It's called the Deep Free Community. And every day people come on and they share tips and share secrets with each other. I am not a PhD in finance. I've never taken a course in budgeting. I learned about money by being broke.
The hard way.
And climbing out of debt, personal experience. So my books have less to do with theory and history and more to do with my own testimony and sharing my mistakes. And I think the more we are transparent with each other, the more we are willing to share our victories and our defeats with each
Mhm.
other, then the more we can be the kind of people we used to be. The reason the AME Church is the AME Church is because the AME Church was built on the whole principle of connection. It's called a connectional church. On this Sunday, I'm preaching at Bridge Street AME Church in Brooklyn, New York.
Mm.
Now, that church is 260 years old. It was founded in Brooklyn before there was an AME church.
Wow.
Yet, when Richard Allen started the AME denomination, the black people in Brooklyn went to Philadelphia to meet with Bishop Allen to form an affiliation. That's what we need. The AME Church is really the model, the standard bearer for black people connecting with each other individually, on the family level, community level, organizational level to really achieve great outcomes.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
So part of our emphasis during this year with our theme and everything is on being free from debt. But debt is not necessarily a bad thing. We tend to frame it that way. But can you just speak to how people can use it more responsibly and use it to actually put them in a better position?
Yeah, I'm not against all debt.
Mm.
However, our challenge is this: most of the debt we have is what you call consumer debt.
Right.
And consumer debt is when you're borrowing money to buy things that don't have value. And you're buying things that you otherwise could not afford. And so it's lifestyle borrowing. So we say we're against the kind of debt that buys things or positions you to make purchases for things you otherwise could not afford. Now, I use credit cards, but I use credit cards to buy things I can afford. So if I go out to dinner tonight and I charge the dinner, I'll pay it off by Friday. I have
Mhm.
zero, I pay no interest on my credit cards. I use them because it's convenient. I use them because I get points. I
Right.
use them because I can return items. So I use credit cards strategically, but I had to grow into that.
Yeah.
Now, I also borrow money to buy assets that grow in value. I had until 2 years ago, I had an apartment building in Newark at 26 tenants. The apartment building cost $4 million. I borrowed $3 million. And the mortgage every month was about $17,000. And my tenants paid me rent. So I collected $26,000 a month in rent. And the rent money paid off the $17,000 mortgage. And then I paid utilities and whatnot. And then I sold the apartment building 2 years after I bought it and made another $1 million. So I was using other people's money to build value and to buy assets that made me money. So the best debt is when you borrow money that other people pay off for you. Good debt is when you borrow money to buy something that grows in value. Bad debt is when you're paying for a lifestyle that you otherwise can't afford to buy things that lose value if they have any in the first place.
And as many people say, to impress people who really don't care anyway.
Oh, people don't care. But think about this. If I'm trying to impress you on Sunday and you're trying to impress me on Sunday, the reality is neither of us are impressing either of us because we're too busy trying to impress ourselves.
The views, opinions, and financial discussions shared on the Know Better to Do Money Better podcast are for educational and informational purposes only. The content presented is not intended to provide legal, financial, accounting, retirement, or investment advice. Listeners should consult with a qualified and licensed financial planner or professional before making any financial decisions. Listening to this podcast does not create a financial advisor-client relationship between the listener and the host, contributors, or any affiliated organization. The hosts, guests, and creators of the Know Better to Do Money Better podcast operate independently. Turner Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church is not providing financial advice and does not guarantee, endorse, or warrant any of the financial strategies, opinions, or recommendations discussed. Podcast host Kevin Turner is the president of Peak Level Advisors, a financial planning firm independently contracted with Money Concepts International. All securities through Money Concepts Capital Corp., member FINRA/SIPC. Peak Level Advisors is an independent firm and is not affiliated with Money Concepts. By listening to this podcast, you agree that Turner Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church, its pastors, leaders, employees, volunteers, and representatives are not liable for any losses, damages, or actions taken in reliance on the information provided in this podcast. Listeners further agree to indemnify, defend, and hold harmless the church and its representatives from any claims, liabilities, or expenses arising from the use or application of the information discussed on this podcast. Financial topics may be discussed in the context of Christian faith and biblical principles. However, such discussions are not a substitute for professional financial counsel.
Well, I love what you said about the credit cards, because that builds up their credit to be able to do the things you did, borrow money to go buy an apartment complex, and using that asset to further, that they have to learn. I mean, I'm not sure they understand that, but what is the biggest mistake that you see when it comes to, you talked about consumer debt, where there's good debt, there's bad debt. What is the biggest mistake you see people making?
We don't pay attention. People are not paying attention. We will buy a car, and we discovered this when Liddy was at First Baptist. We will buy a car and never ask the interest rate. We only ask the monthly payment.
Mm-hmm.
So if the interest rate is 40%, but the payment's only $300, we will pay 40% interest for 72 months, as long as the $300 in our minds is affordable. And so the biggest mistake is we don't pay attention. We don't know what our interest rates are on our houses, on our cars, on our credit cards, on our student loans. We don't know. We don't pay attention. Now we pay attention to some things. We scroll on Instagram. When I'm on Facebook, 200 or 300 people get in touch with me right away. Stop looking at Facebook and start reading and listening and studying. We don't pay attention to our own business. That's the biggest mistake we make.
Maybe that's why we got so many Google subscriptions we don't know about.
I wasn't paying attention. I was not paying attention myself.
Me neither. I'm going to check right after this, I promise you.
I was shocked. Listen, I was paying $4.99 a month to subscribe to things I had never heard of before.
Yeah.
Now, some of it could be fraud. If you don't pay attention, you could be the victim of fraud. We ask people, look at your credit report, if for no other reason, to make sure no one's using your identity to buy things that you don't know about. We had a
Right.
couple in our church. It's not funny, really. We had a couple in our church, and their daughter bought a Mercedes in their name, and they didn't know about it
They-
until she stopped making the payments, and the Mercedes
Oops.
people came to their house to get the car, and they said, well, "I don't own a
What car?
Mercedes." Yeah, these were senior citizens being ripped off
yeah.
by their millennial daughter,
Right.
and the stories go on and on. We have got to pay attention. When we started D Free, I was shocked because we asked people to bring their car notes, bring their mortgages, because people just didn't know what they had signed. So we matched people like Liddy with people, who has experience with people who didn't have experience. And we'd say, bring your mortgage in and let us sit down with you to show you what you signed. They would bring it in and the envelopes would be unopened. I was shocked. I I was so shocked to see intelligent people bring in mail they got from the bank that was 6 months old. They never touched it. They just put it over in the corner and let it sit there. So again, this is not sexy. This is not flashy. This is in some instances not popular. But we can help when we can help people break through and feel excited about doing these basic things. It's life changing for them.
For real.
Let me
Well,
ask
we
you.
talked. Yeah,
Oh,
you brought
sorry.
up the. Yeah, I'm sorry. We talked about good and bad debt, and even you mentioned investing, but we really didn't talk about saving. But how do you get them to prioritize between the three? Between the three, excuse me, between savings, debt, and investing.
Well, let's look at debt. If you look at uh, saving and investing, right? Where in savings on a high yield savings account, you'll get maybe 3-4% return. On a typical average, decently performing Wall Street investment, you'll get 8% return. If you're paying 18%, I haven't seen a credit card less than 14%. So what's the best return on your money? Getting an 8% return from Wall Street or get a 14% return by paying off your 14% interest card. Now,
Mhm.
you want to have some cash on hand, obviously. You want to have a little cash on the side, but the priority has got to be to pay down debt. It's got to be that
Right.
because you're paying 14, 18, 22, 28% interest as long as you don't make a late payment. The minute you pay one day late on any consumer credit, it jumps up sky high. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
not it. And that's why we start with debt. We don't, debt is not the goal, but debt is the first step towards financial freedom, paying off
Nice.
debt.
well, do you have any advice if they're starting from scratch, like what we just talked about, right? Where would prioritize? How do you? Where would you tell them to start?
If they have debt,
Yes. Well,
yeah,
period. Between the debt and the savings, that a lot of them have very little savings and a lot more debt, and
right.
investing hasn't even come into play yet.
That's right. My
Mhm.
my belief is number one, you start with debt. If you read my book, I explain why. Before we even get into strategies, I explain why we start with debt. That's number one. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't save because you always need some savings, always. So let's say you take you have $100 that you can use every month above your needs. And take $90 and pay down debt and take $10 and save it. Because having no money at all ever for anything is just a dangerous way to live in this
Yeah.
world, in this society, anywhere. But I can't emphasize enough. The payment of debt is also taking control of your life. Paying off your debt means you're paying attention like you've never paid attention before. And what you do is you make the list of all your debt from the highest to the smallest. So if I owe 7 companies money, MasterCard, Visa, Macy's, Ford Motor Credit, I take the largest one down to the smallest one. And I make the minimum payment on 6 of them. And I take all the money I can to pay off the smallest one, all the money I can. Just pay it off. If it's $200, $2,000. Once I paid off that small one, I take all the money I was using to pay off the smallest debt. Then I go to the second smallest debt and I add it to what I can pay. So you go what we call the snowball method from the
Hmm.
smallest to the largest. Now, the other way to do it is to do it by the interest rate. because there are people at Turner who are paying high interest rates on some of these payday loans. These loans they advertise and say no credit check, we'll get it to you in 2 hours. And then when they realize it takes them 5 years to pay off a $500 loan.
Hmm.
So if you have one of those tricky high interest loans, you start there because those are like the crack cocaine of financial services. And you pay off the high interest rate loans first as quickly as you can and work your way down to the other interest rates. But you have to have a system. And there are many systems, but you use the system that works for you, stick to the system, and hopefully within the church, within your ministry, there'll be people that will encourage you, pray for you, and hold you accountable to your system.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. Can I jump in?
Did you have something you wanted to ask, Liddy?
Yes, I did. I think I'm on a delay. Um, I want to make two statements. One, I want to tell you that one of the first things that I remember when you started D3, I saw I think at the time it wasn't a podcast, it was an interview, the show where the young man was in college. And by the time he was finished his freshman year, he had $30,000 in debt. That sticks in my mind when I tell my nieces and my nephews, you know, you're too smart nowadays to not be able to go to school for almost next to nothing. Use your brain and get free education. Uh, but I remember that, and I think that's something that young people we don't emphasize enough. I know a lot of parents do because they're looking at their parents and the debt they have, so they don't learn the lessons for themselves. But the tie to all that is really the emotion, fear and emotion is what gets people. I don't want anybody to know where I am. I don't want my emotion drives my bad decisions. Also, I spend money because I'm sad. I spend money, because I'm, hurting. Uh, how do you incorporate or talk about how to help people remove the emotional hold so that they can see the light on the other side?
Yeah, I think that's critical for two reasons. One, uh, marketing and advertising today
Mm.
manipulates emotions. One would think that if I'm trying to sell you something, I'm going to sell you the features of that something and convince you that it's worth your money. That's not what marketers and advertisers do today. They're not selling features, they're selling feelings. So you'll see an ad for tires, just tires for your car. And standing next to the tires is this tall, beautiful model in a bikini. Now,
Mm.
what does a bikini have to do with tires? But that model is there to manipulate your feelings. and so we have to teach people that. We have to explain to people what the triggers are and how they're being manipulated. As black people, I think it's a little easier because we are predisposed to resistance. We don't want to be ripped off. We don't want to be manipulated. We don't want to be oppressed. So it's just a matter of helping our people understand that that kind of oppression is just as bad as look, sit in the back of the bus and drink from the colored water fountain. It's oppression. The other thing is transparency. You know that in my book, I don't condemn people for making the mistakes they make. I just share my mistakes. And I discovered, and I write about this, that what was wrong with me, there were three types of spending that were keeping me broke. One, I call compensatory spending. That's when I feel bad, my girlfriend, lies to me, my boss, makes me mad. So to compensate for whatever feeling I'm having, I go shopping. They call that retail therapy. And
Mm-hmm.
the second type was, when I became a preacher, I had a beautiful Chevy that was paid for, yet I went out and bought a Cadillac on a loan because of status. I believe that preachers drove Cadillacs, and now that I'm a preacher, even though I'm a broke preacher, I needed a Cadillac. So I got more broke as a preacher. So status is a driver. And then the third type, we call it compensatory spending, conspicuous consumption, and then confused spending, which is just stupid. Just stupid. We just make stupid spending mistakes because we've not educated ourselves. And financial literacy is a piece of it. We haven't talked about literacy as much in this conversation because you all know that you can be literate and be a financial fool. I
Yeah.
was financially literate, but I was a financial fool. But it does take literacy. We should know what a Roth IRA is. We should understand what different types of insurance. We should know the difference between term insurance and whole insurance. We should know what an annuity is. We should understand the need for apartment insurance, and if you have a condo, what is insured by the association, what's not insured by these. We need to know those things. That's concrete information, and that's why events like yours are critical, because there does come a time when it's not all hype. You're not going to shout. It's not going to feel good. You just have to know, because the Bible says people suffer for lack of knowledge. And there's some things we just need to know, and we need to be open to learning from others.
Do you think I think that is excellent. And what I try to tell people, if you do not know, connect with somebody who does. That's why Bobby does all of my insurance. I'm like, I'm not trying to learn all the details.
Absolutely.
I'll call you and you tell me, and then I'll figure out which one I
That's
want.
right.
Kevin does the finances for my business partner and my sister, and so you don't know, and I won't say too late. Sometimes we're too old to learn, but we're not too old to find somebody that knows what they're doing, that's been successful, and then listen to what they tell you to do.
Listen, we've got horror stories in the news almost every day of people whose success was thwarted or undermined because they didn't pull together a team of people who know.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So you may know how to play basketball, but you don't know how to manage money. So you got to get people around you who can't play basketball, but they can manage money. Our community has got to stop getting financial advice from beauticians and barbers and TikTok and Facebook. We've got to talk to licensed professionals, licensed insurance brokers, licensed financial advisors, licensed people who are qualified. You wouldn't let anybody do your hair if they didn't have a cosmetology license. And I wouldn't fly on a plane if the pilot didn't have a pilot's license. I, you wouldn't want to get on a plane and have the pilot say, well, I'm not trained, but I like flying. And that's what we do. We go to people who like money and hit the lottery. We're going to the wrong places. And listen, this is new for us. From 1619 up to about 1970 or so, we were preoccupied with these burdens, these shackles imposed upon us by enslavement and Jim Crow. So we're still young at this. None of our grandparents had credit cards. In fact, when credit cards first came out, they wouldn't give them to black people. So
Hmm.
this is new for us. And so it's not that we are just stupid. It's not that we're retarded. It's that this is new to us. We're creating a new part of our culture. Yes, we've had some financial success. Madam C.J. Walker. We like to talk about the individuals, but as a culture, as a community, we've not had this core of financial focus that we could pass on to generations. And it's exciting to be a part of this movement at Turner that you're leading there.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking to in a lot of ways is about something we talk about a lot, which is mindset.
Mindset. That's the word.
And as we get close to wrapping up, just want to make sure that we provide people with kind of some actionable takeaways that they can walk away with if they're viewing this and thinking about how does this apply to me. So, quick question. Out of all of the wise counsel that you have shared with people, what would you consider like the one thing that people should look at right now as something they can incorporate into their lives?
Talk to a professional, either an insurance professional or a tax professional or an investment professional or a financial planner. Find a professional. If you can't find one, these folks at Turner, if you're at Turner, you've got professionals right here. And if you have any qualms about talking to people in your own church, we have a Get Help page on our website, dfree.com/get help. And we can connect you with a free coach. a free financial advisor for consultation. We can help you talk to a debt counselor, someone to help you restructure your debt and figure out the best strategy if you're overwhelmed by debt. But go for help from a professional. Don't just go down to the corner and ask somebody at McDonald's some advice about money. But get help, whatever you are. People say to me all the time, "Well, I don't have enough money to talk to a financial professional." Well, you never have enough money if you don't talk to a financial professional,
Yep.
because the money you have will not be used as effectively without the help of a professional. Even
Chicken and the egg.
even financial professionals have financial professionals. It's like
True.
doctors. Doctors have doctors. Lawyers hire lawyers. Everybody needs. I have three financial professionals: one for retirement, one for taxes, and one for investing. And I'm not rich, but I'd like to keep what I have and grow what I have, which means I need financial professional advice.
Right.
And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, some of what Lady was saying in terms of leveraging your resources. You can't be the expert in everything. You don't need to be. But there are resources out there all around. If you can avail yourself of them, you have great opportunity. Like you said, our generations are kind of new in this space. So we're gonna make some mistakes. That's okay.
It's
But
okay.
there are a lot of people who are experienced and can help you. So take
That's right.
advantage of it.
Yeah.
One other kind of actual takeaway I wanted to ask about is in terms of habits. What would you say is a financial habit that is critically important?
To check your finances 7 minutes a day.
Mm,
Mm.
Take 7 minutes every day to look at your mortgage, to look at your investments, to read an article, listen to a podcast. Invest 7 minutes a day to start and develop that discipline. It could be morning, lunchtime, dinner time, before you go to bed, but invest 7 minutes a day into something financial, starting with your subscriptions. That's what happened to me. Your subscription, your investments, what other people are saying, and read a book. The book that changed my life, the book that changed and made me write my book was a book written by a Harvard professor called The Overspent American.
Mm.
Dr. Juliet Shore wrote that book. And she basically in that book answers the question, why do we spend so much money? And how can we change our habits?
hmm
That book was one of the pivotal moments for me, because the more money I made, the more debt I was in and the more money I spent. And I couldn't figure it out. And then, of course, my grandmother died with no education, 6 kids, and a husband who couldn't work because of his health. And my first house I inherited from my grandmother. I think I said that when I was there before. So I'm trying to figure out, how can I be this great civil rights activist with education and no money? And my grandmother had no civil rights, no education. She died a millionaire. This
Yeah.
didn't work. So I just started studying my grandmother's life and lifestyle. And I
hmm
think we should do that. We have a lot. This is Black History Month. We have a lot of stories about Black people who were born enslaved and died millionaires.
Right.
Yeah.
I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma a month ago, because I'm working with some people in Tulsa around the whole Black Wall Street thing. And so when we talk about Tulsa, Oklahoma, the tragedy of Tulsa, of course, is that white people were so angry at the progress made by Black people, they just burned down Greenwood, the whole Black neighborhood. That was 1921. The miracle of Tulsa was that Black people didn't start building until 1907. So between 1907, when Black people kind of came from Mississippi and other places and settled in Tulsa, in 14 years, they had built so many businesses. They bought so many cars. Four or five guys had their own airplanes. In
Okay.
14 years, they developed so much prosperity that it drove the white folks crazy and to violence. So
Mhm.
I'm studying what they did during those 14 years more than I'm studying what the white people did in 1921.
Right.
Because if they could do that in 14 years, then it's instructive as to how
hmm
we can build and focus and build a community ourselves.
Yeah. You answered one of my questions. I was going to ask you what's the best book you should say you would give advice to people to check out, and that's a very good one that you mentioned. I know it. I know it. I haven't read it though.
Yeah. Well, that's a good book. The best book is Say Yes to No Debt. How to Achieve Financial Freedom by a guy named DeForest B. Soares Jr. and his friends called
And
him
where can they find that book at?
Amazon. Just go to
I got you.
Amazon right now,
All right.
and I'll have some with me when I come to Turner. Are you going to have some? Do you have some already, Liddy?
Your book or my?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you were talking about mine. No, I don't have any already. Do
All
you
right.
want?
Well, I'll have some with. If you don't order some, I'll bring some with me for
Well,
sure.
yeah. Let me ask Brother Kevin and that. Are we gonna try to have?
Yeah,
Um,
we're gonna do a book signing.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we have what we call our overtime period
Right.
after the main part of the conference ends.
Okay.
During that portion of time, you'll have a chance to sell, sign your book.
Good.
I'm sure it'll come up during the course of either your talk or during the Q&A period.
Okay.
So
However you want to do it, I'm open.
Let me ask you this, Kevin. A quick question though. This is the sales in me. Do we want to tell people to buy the book ahead of time, and then they'll be able to get their book signed versus
However you want to do it,
till
it's
they?
up
We
to
could
you.
give them the option of doing. If they can't get it ahead of time, they can pick one up at the church.
Sure.
They
Yeah.
can they can order Amazon, bring it, and he will sign it.
Right.
Right.
And if they want, I'll sign it too. I don't know if that do any good though. Might drive more
We'll
sales.
all sign it.
that'll add like 2 cents worth of value to it.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's
we'll
right.
all sign it. That's right.
Okay. So second question: what's the
Yeah.
best financial advice you've ever received to date?
To invest in real estate.
Mhm.
Yeah. For me, 50% of my assets today are in real estate. And I'll never regret having invested in real estate. In fact, I read a book by Robert Allen called Nothing Down, No Money Down, and learned that you can buy real estate without even putting a down payment. And I did that. I bought a 4 family house. You know the actress Tisha Campbell?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yep.
I owned the house she lived in when she lived in New Jersey.
Oh,
Her
wow.
mother was my superintendent. Her mother collected rent from the other 3 tenants. I gave her a discount, and we're friends to this day. But investing in real estate, I bought the house she lived in with no money down. We worked it out the way I had read in a book, and now I have a pretty decent understanding of real estate, and I've made a pretty decent amount of money off of real estate.
Did you go seeking the apartment complex, or did a opportunity come? Did you come across an opportunity?
As God would have it, I had just finished. I went to Robert Allen's seminar, the free one. I bought and read the book, and as I was reading the book, I bumped into an opportunity. There was a guy who really needed cash, and he owned this house that Tisha Campbell's family lived in, and I was able to show him how he could sell me the house, get all the cash he wanted without me putting a down payment down, and we did that. And then I sold it. Oh, I sold it a year later and made 25% profit.
Mhm.
Nice.
What's the one question somebody should ask before they get into a major financial decision? I
Yeah,
mean that one was opportunity, right? So if you're
right.
going seeking, what's that one question they should ask before whether it's buying some commercial real estate, buying personal real estate, uh, going investing? Is there that question you need to know this first?
Yeah, you need to know what your goal is
Mhm.
before you make a financial decision of any kind, particularly an investment. You need to know what your goal is. Is your goal to grow your investment over a 10 to 15-year period? Is your goal to generate a certain amount of money in the next 6 to 12 months? What is your goal? Because the worst thing you can do is to invest any amount of money and have one goal in mind, and the investment you've made is not appropriate to accomplish that goal. It's not realistic.
Mhm.
So, for instance, we have a young guy here who buys and fixes up and sells houses. That's what he does. And if you have $100,000 to invest in him, he'll give you a 12% return, but you got to keep the money there for 2 years. So the return is great. He's got a great track record, never defaulted. But if I can't afford to keep $100,000,
Mm-hmm.
in his hands for 2 years, that's a bad investment, even though the yield is a potentially good yield.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
all you have to know what your goals are. No investment is good necessarily unless you have goals and you can see how that investment aligns with and helps you reach your goals.
Well, I know we got to wrap it up, so I'm gonna selfishly ask you to expound on something because you mentioned something before we got on air. You started talking about your mother's situation and
Right.
having to put her somewhere, and I just went through the same thing. And because I deal in the insurance side, I know the value there, right? And where people are putting their money. That you said investment, you talked about long term, that 2 year, but a lot longer than that. When you look at parents and how we're going to take care of them, and right now it costs more than ever, right? So if you don't have that money, it used to be, especially the females in the family took care of the grandparents, and they would when they were, when they needed help. And now they're going away from that. So we have to find these homes, and that you're looking, I'm sure you're finding how expensive they are. So is there advice from a long-term perspective you give somebody who aren't thinking about it now but are going to have to take care of their parents or have somebody take care of them?
Yeah, that's why I want us to talk to professionals because every professional worth his or her salt is going to force us to think that way. We've got to think about support for our parents who perhaps only have Social Security as their income. We have to think about long term care. I think consistent in that bucket is also disability insurance because we are more likely to be disabled before we turn 65 than we are likely to die before we're 65. So to have life insurance and disability insurance is really defying the data about our reality. And I mean, you talk about cost. I think my sister told me about the last place she saw to be in a nursing home, just a regular nursing home. Uh, they want $350 a day for my mother a day.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking $10,000 a month.
Yep.
So
Yes.
let's say I have $1 million. Let's say I have $1 million in cash for my retirement, right? That $1 million could be gone in 10 years if I have to take care of my mother without long-term insurance. And that's why insurance, we are the most underinsured people in the world. And in my book, I have a whole checklist that I ask people to fill out. Do you have this insurance, that insurance, this insurance, that insurance? Because we like to talk about all the sexy stuff, but insurance is as basic as breathing.
Hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
long term care is so expensive, and there's no such thing as inexpensive long term care. Now,
Yes.
having said that, there are also strategies that we can employ in advance. So, for instance, what we would tell our members is, there are government benefits still to support people who need care, but they want your assets first. So in some instances, it might be wise to spend down or shift your assets 2 or 3 years ahead of time, which positions you to take advantage of Medicaid and Medicare benefits that you wouldn't be able to take advantage of if you have a house with $500,000 in value.
Yeah.
But that's why a financial expert, a financial professional who can help you create a plan is good. My mother's 95 years old. So when she was 85 with no life-threatening disease, which she still doesn't have she's got challenges, but nothing life-threatening, she could end up coming to my funeral. We started making plans. My grandmother, by the way, put her house in my name before she died.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So I was a property owner. I inherited my inheritance before my grandmother even died. So
Yeah.
these are the kinds of strategies we want people to talk about. And what worked for me may not work for you.
Right.
And
Yeah.
just because it worked for them doesn't mean it works for us. So it's got to be individual, tailored with the guidance of at least one professional. And
Yeah.
long
And
term,
keep
because
in
we're
mind
living,
now,
we're living longer and longer.
Yeah.
but now they look back 7 years.
Is it
So if
7 years? Yeah.
you're gonna transfer them assets, you want to start doing it very early.
Yeah.
But I wanted to throw that in there because we talked about it earlier, and
Right.
And I know Kevin's going to wrap it up right now, but thank you very much for that.
No, thank you for asking the question.
No, that was good. Yeah, we're gonna wrap up. You spent a lot of time with us, and we greatly appreciate it. And I know there's gonna be so much more that we will get when you speak to us at the conference. But before we close out tonight, if you could just let the audience know how can they access you, all the things you're working on.
Yeah.
You mentioned a book, and I know you have multiple books. How can people access you, whether it's digitally or what have you?
Yeah, dbsories.com. That's my website, dbsories.com. That is my website. You can find my social media. You can find my blog. You can find my YouTube channel. You can find D-free activities. Everything I do in life that I don't mind people knowing about, they can access through dbsories.com.
Well, hopefully people will take advantage of that. Any final thoughts before we go to the wrap up?
I am looking forward to coming to Turner. I was with your pastor a few months ago. I was where was I? In Atlanta at,
You were at Bishop Jackson's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I was at the funeral. But even before that, I
Yeah,
was
right. Because he did tell me that he saw you somewhere else too.
where was St. Philip had an event, a
Mm-hmm.
retreat for their leadership, and your pastor was at that retreat, and I saw him there, and I just loved your pastor. He's such a down to earth, easygoing, sincere guy,
Mm-hmm.
which are three adjectives you can't use for every preacher. I just love him. He's the real deal, and that's why I'm that's why I'm coming. I can't tell you how important it is that pastors like yours have members like you, because a lot of people assume that the pastor has to do everything, and I can tell you that the greatest joy of any pastor is to have members like you that take the bull by the horns, take the leadership, bring their talent through the parking lot into the church. And it's a blessing to know people like you that support your pastor and your church and the cause of Christ the way you do. So I'm honored to
Amen.
know you. Yeah.
Well, we are blessed to have the pastor that we have, but we also understand we have a responsibility to minister as well. We may not be licensed preachers, but we all have a ministry
Right.
to do in whatever our sphere is.
Right. Great. Thank you so much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Look forward to
it.
seeing you next month.
God bless you.
God bless.